Storybird, Edmodo, and Codecademy.
My name is Pierre-Antoine Huguemot. I am the co-founder of the Open Education Challenge. The Open Education Challenge is a European incubator for education startups that we launched exactly a year ago here at BET in partnership with the European Union. And we are just finishing the first edition. And we got more than 600 startups that applied, and we incubated 7 of them. One of them will be here tonight to fish in front of you. And I'm also a big fan of Avi and a big supporter of this global competition. And in fact, really looking forward this global approach, which is partially what we managed to create European-wide, and hopefully that we will enlarge worldwide.
I'm Matthew Warshawski. I hope you remember me. I don't.
I remember Avi as well. My name is Ian Fordham. I'm the director of the program called the EdTech Incubator here in London. We were the UK's first EdTech Accelerator program, particularly focused on helping to build the ecosystem here and also supporting teacher-led startups and teacher entrepreneurs. We ran our first cohort last year for 2020 teacher-led startups, and we're also running the BET Startup Zone, which I sort of run from, having run for 30 startups over 4 days, 40 sessions, and sort of lots of plants and kind of startup village kind of activity there. And also, as well as that, I run an education think tank called the Education Foundation. Does a lot of work in the digital technology space.
For a word on the procedures, we have 5 questions or 5 issues that we're going to raise to the panelists, and we have limited time. So what we'll do, each question will be directed to one of you, and I will mention and state who is the guy or the lady, and then we'll have like 2 more comments maybe from the other panelists, so we can make it through the time. So the first issue, the first question maybe will go for you, Gary. And we see in the last few years, maybe 4 or 5 years, a record every year, a new record in investment in EdTech globally. And we keep on hearing this is going to be the next bubble. And are we, making a bubble here, or this is something that is really a necessity that the world understand that education system should change? So with this regard, when you look at a new startup company, how do you really treat regarding to this issue?
So I think the way I've answered is to go back to kind of the criteria that Avi used when he was talking about the startup competition. I think that there can be no bigger pain today than education. Maybe healthcare would be another one. I think about my own personal story. My parents immigrated from Jamaica to the U.S. so that we could have a better life. Part of that is because there's a better educational system. Part of it is because parents want their kids to be able to make the most of the opportunities we have. I think that technology can play an important role in that process. What more fundamental can there be? So I think that when I look at, when we look at kind of particularly some of the markets that we operate in, like Latin America, for some people this is really kind of like that Telefonica did a huge role at the very beginning of putting $100 million in certain markets to kind of end child labor in particularly Latin American markets. And if we can then kind of support educational technologies so that people can actually have some sort of social mobility, I think that's probably something that's really, really important. So the first part of the question is, I think, part of the reason why people spend so much attention on this is parents have no greater necessity than to make sure that their kids get the best education possible, regardless of where they're starting out from in life. To the second question as to how we choose startups, after we kind of have seen, hundreds, at this point I think we've seen about 30,000 startup applications. After a while you start to apply the same rules that you apply to any other startup, which is basically like, is there someone out there that's doing something similar, that's doing something better? Is there a real pain that this person solved and taking into account all of the other existing options? So I think that as the market matures, then obviously that means that the standard that you use to evaluate starts to become more stringent. relative to what it was 4 years ago, when we started to see lots of these startups kind of coming out of Latin America and other markets. We didn't really even know that there was going to be a field called EdTech. We just knew that people were trying to solve a pain that they had in their markets. Then when you start to see it happening across all of the different regions, the 12 countries that we are operating in, then you start to see there's a larger social movement or a movement going on there as well. And when I look at my own country, the US, and you see the government struggling to figure out how it's going to fix the education system, whether through charter schools or through technology, we realize that this is something that's going to be around for a while because it's a huge problem and no one's fixing it.
Anyone want to relate this?
I'm happy to sort of from I suppose another investor perspective. I think the question of bubbles comes up a lot, and I think in education, but also in healthcare and social media, and I think ultimately you have to look at investing in things which are serious, which are businesses and which are kind of products. And I think so. Taking an example like Kano. They raised a Kickstarter campaign where they'd raised 1.8 million and sold 18,000 units on their Kickstarter campaign before we kind of even invested. And I think those kind of companies, they're substantial companies, and you can't sort of talk in terms of bubble when there's real companies there. So I think that's kind of what we look for.
Can I just say just one? Actually, reflects one of the Saul's from Index Ventures. Sort of conception about there's been a lot of disruption in areas of discretionary areas of our life. So the way in which shopping has been changed and all that kind of disruption in that first phase of the web. He then says that where we're kind of moving is into these non-discretionary areas like education, health, and they are harder to solve. But I think that clearly these are areas where there are major challenges around the world. And those two phases of the web, I think we've seen so much disruption, so much talk about certain areas of the web. And fintech is mentioned, ad tech, and every other word with the word tech added into it. I think education, learning technology is one of those areas that's definitely here to stay. There's so much demand out there. And I think some of the activities that we get around from Abby and Pierre and others as well to stimulate that as well as actually respond to it is fantastic.
Well, I hope that this, logic and enthusiasm will really push the EdTech industry, the EdTech market forward, and let's hope. Second issue for you, Grace. About 15 years ago, I think, started the movement of 21st century skills. I think it started back in Arizona with the P21. And the idea was that 21st century skills is that this century people need new skills in order, to overcome the challenges of the new labor market. And now we see it really radically. We see the international exams like PISA 2015, which is going to be on collaborative problem solving, scientific literacy, and things like that. So the education board is going to this direction. And then we go into your portfolio of your venture capital, and we look at Edmodo and we look at others which are really going into the traditional classroom, which is the traditional setup of a school, which not really going forward for getting the kids the skills they need for the labor market or for the future. And others are really to some extent disruptive, like you mentioned before. So with this regard, how do you guys look at your companies, for the future?
I think my thing's turned off, but I have quite a loud voice. But I think that we have both kind of education technology companies, and then we also have companies which are sort of providing technology within educational institutions. And I think in terms of the former group, I would say, and some of them cross over the both. So for example, Code Academy, which is an online free tool to teach you how to code. Now, their highest growth growing section at the moment is people who are young professionals who see that in order to kind of improve their chances of getting a job, they need to learn these digital skills. And say, for example, in the marketing industry, people who joined the marketing industry sort of 15 years ago, who, PPC, kind of did all these digital marketing skills weren't an issue at all, and now they're fundamental for their job. And I think that vertical specific further education sector is really interesting. It's a really interesting investment opportunity, but it's also kind of incredibly valuable for people who see the world and the skills they're needing changing. And then obviously at the same time there's the companies who you mentioned, so Edmodo, who worked incredibly closely with teachers in building a product which is kind of completely integrated into schools. It's kind of built alongside teachers, and I think that if you're looking at that category, which is education technology, so technology to be used within schools, you've got to work with you haven't got to work with the teachers, you've got to understand their kind of concerns and kind of all of the challenges in terms of infrastructure, in terms of kind of the other tools and making everything kind of collaborate together. So there's huge investment and huge opportunity in both of these groups, and I think that the execution needs to be different in each.
Yes, please.
Just to comment on this, on what you said, I think the venture capitalist, the VC, is a wise person. So the question the VC will ask to an entrepreneur and to an edtech entrepreneur won't be very different from the question you will ask to any other entrepreneur. I will say, when will I get my money back? And the difference with education that he or she will be ready to wait for a longer time to get the money back. And the time he or she is ready to wait for may also condition how forward-looking you may be. But the basic question at the end will remain, and I think this is a very interesting finding, at least what we had during this year, the finding that at the end, education is not different from any other thing. The only thing is you need to be a believer on top of it. So.
Okay, I met today at the BET show Andreas Schleifer from the OECD, the guy who is termed like Mr. Education, World Education. And we had a short conversation about the PISA 2015 and how we can change the way school operates and seems to operate in terms of innovation. And unfortunately, he said that the biggest obstacle or the biggest problem is government, ministries of education, bureaucracy, etc., etc. So with this regard, you started to give some answer to that in this question, but now I want to ask you, Pierre, about disruptive and disruptive innovation. When you look today at the startup in the edtech industry, would you look for disruptive system or something else? And please.
The word disruptive is a very interesting one. When we presented the challenge, our first temptation was to say, this is a disruptive initiative. Usually when you don't know exactly what to say, you say it's disruptive. and we got an entry on our blog from a great specialist grammaton, and he said, why do you want to be disruptive? I mean, we are just aiming at transformation, not really disruption. And I think that we have a lot to do in transforming education, because education needs transformation, but we need also to build on top of ongoing things. There is a lot of very innovative practices in school. Many of them don't depend on technology, and many of them have years of existence. I was reading an article a few days ago to prepare an answer for the advisor of the French President for Education. He asked me about all these digital trends, and he told me, is it true that in the Silicon Valley the big executives from Google, from Apple, they are sending their kids to non-digital schools. There's a big issue in France regarding the distribution of tablets to kids starting next year as a proxy for a very ambitious digital policy in school. Don't know how ambitious it is, at least for the pupils. And I told him, I don't know exactly what the trend, but I think is that they are rediscovering the world of schools. And Steiner is not a new guy, he's not a newcomer, he's not an edtech entrepreneur, but he's an innovative educator. So disruption is, I don't think, the word. I think that transformation is more the word we need, and maybe where OECD is also aiming at.
I would like to argue for the sake of the word disruption, not in the sense of the word from the dictionary, but the sense that Clayton Christensen coined, which I think the main interesting claim that he has in his theory is the fact that there is a process led by non-consumers that are buying the product and really changing the value chain in the market. And I think this theory is very relevant for the education, and the way I see it in educational world is that the non-consumers are living in the open internet. They are users of YouTube and Wikipedia and other areas of internet culture, natural internet culture. And I think the disruption of education will come from these areas. It won't come from schooling technologies. It won't be another LMS or another bureaucracy system. It wouldn't even be another textbook platform. It will be something from this world. And in this sense, I think that the word is very accurate. I think it's a bad word for a very interesting theory.
You're right, I will agree with you. There is an interesting article that Yishai Moore, who is in the room, published in one of our e-learning paper issues, and if you're interested in, you can look at it. I think it's issue number 33. It's openeducationeuropa.eu, and you just go to e-learning papers, and there is an interesting reflection and discussion on disruption versus transformation within this big phenomenon. So we need to go on this after.
I wouldn't say to steer for policymakers, frankly, about their understanding. I think there's a big digital skills issue there amongst policymakers to understand what this world looks like. You know, their default position is quite analog, and will be, I've been into one school, I've seen something, I'm not impressed. So therefore, let's make a policy about that. Prove me wrong. So we have this interesting kind of just stepping into both camps, and when you pull back the curtain in the Wizard of Oz piece, you'll see someone kind of pranking around there, and I think our job partly is to educate those people in those positions of authority to try and get that, and positive disruptions, a better phrase, I'd say, because this is not, if you're a teacher entrepreneur, you want something to solve your challenge. You don't want a product that's just not going to work in a classroom, it's not going to be good for you. So I think we're battling around loads of buzzwords here, but I think it's that sense of being able to say we are using this, but it's actually does something.
Okay, so this brings us to the fourth question issue. And well, 3 years ago, the Future Institute in Palo Alto, headed by I think Marina Borbis, found a white paper on the working skills of 2020, and they say it like 10 skills. One of them was, they termed it 3 years ago, computational thinking. I call it algorithm thinking, and maybe the UK system call it coding. And coding became mandatory, if I'm not wrong, in the UK system, which is, I believe, a great move. To a certain extent, coding is some disruption because it's not part of the traditional and core curriculum. It's something else. It goes for algorithm thinking. It goes something else. How you introduce something as mandatory, which means it's core curriculum. So what do you think, and it goes for you, Ian, about this non-traditional subject matters that are penetrating into the curriculum? Maybe you should say something about the coding, but also, do you think that other subject matters disciplines will enter the core curriculum and to a certain extent will change the way school operates today?
My view is it's a bit of a coding frenzy in the UK over the last year. I mean, every initiative that's announced is a new coding program. Someone coined coding is the new Latin, which is probably not the greatest thing for teachers. I'm a former teacher. I think that's the way I would really approach this, because they're basically a subject area which teachers find really hard to teach and young people find even more obsolete. So computational thinking, that sort of element, I think actually is a very bold statement and a very bold policy in terms of the UK. I applaud it completely. What we're also finding though is about the perception of this actually when it comes to the school level. So today we just announced that we're doing a piece of work for the Mayor of London on basically how you kind of mesh these things together. So work with schools about where they are in terms of computational thinking, computer science, which is a big distance away from where people think about things. But also, in the UK, we're not the only country who's done this. There are countries in Europe, there are other places that have actually said, look, we will make coding the core of young people's knowledge to do that. But no, and another area I think is technology enhanced learning. So the way in which technology can infuse other subjects. Coding frenzy, the coding kind of challenge I think out there is that globally we need to have those skills. I think people coming to bet admiring the UK for being so bold about that. But as with all the startups we work with, it's about the implementation. I kind of banned the word coding for a while, just to kind of get it out of the vocabulary and start to focus more about addressing those needs. But the great thing about it is it's starting at 5 years old and going up. So that entitlement to those kind of skills and becoming more the producers rather than consumers of technology is a great thing, and we should be proud of it.
Maybe it's a good formula to get the government in and get public money or government money into the system, which will to a certain extent can enhance some edtech startups in the system. So somebody else wants to refer to that, please.
Well, actually, sort of just coming off from what Ian's saying, I agree. I think I'm so excited about computational thinking, and I also think, in addition, within education, we need to have more, and this within educational institutions, we need to have more of a dialogue and more training around digital skills. And by these digital skills, I mean how young people can kind of navigate the internet, so kind of security on the internet, kind of privacy on the internet, kind of training young people to kind of understand the longevity of what they put online. And I think all of these sort of lessons are really important, because we see that the pace at which the internet sort of is developing is faster than the educational institutions are being able to sort of teach and protect young people from what's happening there. So I think there's another side, which is a kind of not necessarily skills, but sort of education, which needs to be included.
There are 900,000 jobs related to coding to be filled. So I think it's a necessity. Now, is it disruptive? I think it's really pragmatic. And when something is mandatory, I'm not sure it's really disruptive. To put creativity as a mandatory issue in the curriculum may be disruptive.
Anybody else for that? Okay, so we get to the last issue, the last question. As I know Avi for so many years, the question's already been answered by him in his presentation. So I will raise it, Avi will refer to it, but please everyone do refer to this last issue. And I call this issue, as Avi started to talk about the globalization of the language that we all speak, the startup language, this competition, we see that more and more subjects in schooling system all over are the same, like coding and other things. And so is education becoming globalized, like one system that everyone around the world will have to a certain extent the same curriculum? Or we still gonna keep our local cultures and other things that are unique to the local society, something called, the term in sociology called globalization. Globalization means global issues that every society is now encountering, but still keep the local culture, and try to mingle both of them and see what comes out of it. So what are we going to see in the future in terms of the relationship between the global education and the local needs of the local culture? Avi, please.
Well, I think it's an even wider question than the educational field, since we see a huge amount of platforms that are really implemented worldwide. So people from Afghanistan and China and the US and Israel are using some of the same platforms, maybe China not, but not yet. And the fact that kids from all over the world are using Instagram to express themselves, or mature people are using Twitter, I think it reflects culture, and I see it in a way a dangerous process, because I strongly believe in the power of multicultural aspects, but I don't think we can stop this train. And I think since this is the basic reality that we are facing, we should see also the process of this kind of processes, and I think the fact that we're going to have some kind of a common language between different educational systems is enhancing the local, and it creates also some kind of competing. I can tell that we were in a meeting with Code Monkey, which is going to present in a few minutes, and they're doing coding. And we met the Minister of Treasury in Israel, and he was told that coding became mandatory in Britain. So he said, oh, we must do it in Israel also. So I think in a way, it makes some kind of competition and some kind of awareness to other places, and in this sense, it's very important. Also in the sense of the working world. We see here in this room, people who came from the US and from Jamaica originally, and now located in London, and from Israel to Spain so I think it's a global market, and we need some, as preparing our students to these lives, we need some global aspects to our education.
Say, having lived in Spain